Good evening. The webinar will start within 5 minutes. How to master the art of publishing in social sciences and humanities. To know what you know and what you do not know, that is true knowledge, said Confucius. Hi, I am Jan de Beer, and I will be your webinar host today about how to master the art of publishing in social sciences and humanities. Well, to connect with the words of Confucius, we know that we only have an hour to speak about a huge topic. So we will do our utmost to give you a good overview of this topic in the time available. Please post your queries if you have any questions. You will see the screen similar to this, and then you can hit the send button after you type your question. So today we are going to look at how to get started with your research study, publishing in humanities and social sciences, open access publishing in humanities and social sciences, and what is digital humanities. So let's start. How to get started with your research study. Now, humanities and social sciences has always been differentiated from natural sciences, and they do differ in a few ways. Where humanities and social sciences focus on qualitative questions mostly, although they do have quantitative measures, and usually ask about meaning and the meaning of life and humanity. We have the natural sciences that focus on quantitative questions and mostly has to do with numbers and measuring quantitatively. Now, if we look at humanities and social sciences, we can also look at the differences between the two, because in a way we can say, okay, humanities focus more on human heritage. It asks the question, what makes us human? And it has more of an interpretive methodology to render the meaning of things and of our culture and humanity. Social sciences, on the other hand, will analyze and explain and try to predict human behavior. And social sciences will do more of an empirical, rational, and objective methodology to present the facts. So, how to get started with your research study in humanities and social sciences? Well, the first thing is you have to explore your research idea. And then we look at how to find background information, how to locate current research, and how to plan your research strategy. So the first thing when you start to explore your research idea would be to choose a topic. That can sometimes take a lot of time and energy. The scope of your topic should not be too broad or too narrow, and a thorough literature review should be done. State your topic as a question, identify concepts and keywords, and consult experienced people. That will help you to choose a good topic. Then test your topic. Look up for keywords and concepts in the appropriate background sources. Narrow your topic if you find too much information, or broaden your topic if you find too little information. I want to use during this presentation an example of a study about Shakespeare. Shakespeare lived from 1564 to 1616, And let's say we choose a topic, the influence of Shakespeare's work on English literature. Now, that would be a very broad topic. So the scope of this topic should not be too broad or too narrow. Going through the literature, you will see, okay, this is too much. Maybe we should narrow it down and let's test the topic. Let's say we look at Shakespeare's influence on poetic writings in literature, in English literature. But that might still yield too much results. And then you can say, let's narrow it down in a time period. Let's say the influence of Shakespeare's work on poetic or English poetic literature in the first half of the 17th century. So in that way, you can narrow the scope of your topic so that it becomes something that is researchable. So when you start to collect the background information, identify the fields of study relevant to your focus. You can start by using general encyclopedias like the Encyclopedia Britannica online, or the Oxford Reference Online. And you can use subject-specific encyclopedias as well to get more subject-specific literature or popular databases for your subject-specific literature. So in this case, if we are researching Shakespeare, we would look at literature encyclopedias or databases focused on that. And then you can also look at books. And usually you will get a more in-depth look at your research idea coming from the books. Then you also have to locate the current research. So the first place to start locating that research is look what has been published in journals, in periodicals, like journals, newspapers, magazines. Databases are a very good way to look for the current research. Although you might not always be able to see the full text, you can see what has been published. Topics and abstracts are available. So look for current articles and other materials related to your research. And they're very, very important in this kind of research is the right keywords. Make sure that you use keywords and try different combinations of it. So in our example of Shakespeare's literature, we can search for Shakespeare literature, English literature, poetic literature, English poetic, English Shakespeare poetic. So use different combinations of your keywords. And then you can also look at multidisciplinary and together with your subject-specific databases. So here you can see some of the research paper databases for referencing for arts and humanities. Look at those: America, History and Life, Art, Full Text, Historical Abstracts, Literature Online, MLA, Language and Literature, EBSCO, ProQuest. The MLA stands for Modern Language Association. Or with social sciences, you can look at Education Full Text, Gender Watch for gender issues, Business Resource Premier, PsycInfo, psychology related, and sociological abstracts. It's important to evaluate your sources well. You should look at things like authorship, publisher, the content or the length, sources that are cited, the structure and the audience to distinguish between scholarly articles and popular articles. So if you look at all this authorship, scholarly articles will be written by experts clearly named and their affiliations will be given. Popular articles, you will more get staff writers and journalists. Looking at the publisher, the scholarly articles are usually published by university presses, professional associations, and there will be a peer review or a scholar editing. Popular articles, corporations who work for profit will usually be publishing those. The content and length of scholarly articles will usually be longer with a focus on research projects, methodology, theory. The language will be formal, technical, and more discipline specific, while popular articles will be shorter with a general focus, written for news or for entertainment. And the citing of sources will be very precise in scholarly articles, and the bibliography will be provided, or the table, the references. With popular articles, you will often not even see any sources. It's not of such important in those articles. So, in terms of structure, your scholarly articles may include abstract, literature review, methodology, results, conclusion, and bibliography. Uh, Now, popular articles will not have any specific format. And in terms of the audience, well, scholarly articles are written for academics, scholars, researchers, and professionals, while the popular articles are written for the general public. Very important that you should plan your research strategy. Consider the following questions to help you to determine the best research strategy. This is your research plan. This is how you're going to do the whole research. So ask yourself, how much time do I have? On what type of project am I working? What type of information do I need? How will I test my thesis question? What kind of sources do I need? Primary, secondary, or both? The answers to these questions will determine a lot on how you will approach your research. If you have a lot of time, then you can work in more detail. If you don't have so much time, then you're probably going to work on a smaller project. What kind of information do you need? Whether you have to go to primary or secondary sources will make a huge difference. Sometimes primary sources are not easy to obtain. It might cost a lot of money also to go or travel to places where you get those primary sources. And a very important question, how will you test your thesis question? You must have a clear picture how you're going to test that in order to know how your research will be strategized. So we were looking at the way you should explore your research idea, how to find some background information, how to locate the current research that has been done in that field, and important, plan your research strategy. Now let's look at publishing in humanities. We will look in 5 steps. Number 1, choosing a good journal, and then writing the introduction. Number 3, writing the body, writing the conclusion, and lastly, the referencing. If you look at this picture, you get a good idea of the process of journal submission. The authors on the left-hand side will write the paper, and after you've done a lot of work, you will start to prepare your manuscript for journal submission. And then that green arrow shows that you've submitted. It will firstly go to an editorial board, sometimes to an editor, and that editorial board will send it to the editorial screening, or they will do the editorial screening and then send it to the experts. The experts will go through the article, the paper. They will look at it from different angles, and they will either say that a revision is required, or say that they accept it, or say they reject this paper, this article. If it's rejected, then you have an opportunity to improve on your paper and submit it to a different journal. If they require revision, that gives you a good opportunity to make some changes, revise it, to upgrade your paper. And that should never be something that you take a lot of time on. Do it as quickly as possible so that you can resubmit to the editorial board. And then you can probably go through the same process of revision and resubmission, usually not more than twice, and then they will either accept it or it will be rejected. And when it gets accepted at this point, then your paper will be published. A very important thing here is to remember that a rejection does not mean the end of your paper. It means that you can work a little bit more on your paper, or maybe submit it to a different journal that is more in the scope of what you are researching. So it's important to read the feedback that you receive from the journal, whether you get a rejection or a revision. And when you do the revision, make sure that you indicate clearly which changes you've made and how you've upgraded your paper. And look especially at the recommendations that was given by the subject area experts. Now, if you choose a journal, it's important to look at a journal that publishes articles in your field, and that has a lot to do with the topic that you are busy with. Your bibliography and the bibliography of important papers in your research will give you an indication of some of those journals. It's important to choose a journal that is peer-reviewed. That became a very important aspect of research in the last few years, and it shows the quality of your paper. It's important to choose a journal that is database accessible, because you do want people to find your work and to quote your work, because that influences your H index. You also want a journal that has an international audience. Preferably, sometimes you can look at country-specific journals, but also, again, for your citation index, it's good to have an international or a wider audience. Look at a journal that has a high impact factor. That makes also a difference in terms of who reads your work and how much exposure you will get. And also, this journal should be indexed in prestigious indexing databases. We are looking at databases like Scopus, DOAJ, EBSCO, or ProQuest, databases like those. And also look at the journal that is possibly an open access journal. We will speak about the open access a little bit later on in this webinar. So prepare your manuscript for the journal. First and important thing is conform to the journal guidelines that's given by the journal, usually on their website. The guide for authors in the journal guidelines will give you detailed editorial guidelines like formatting and styles, spacing and referencing, submission procedures, fees for publishing open access if they have open access, and the copyright and ethical guidelines. Make sure that you know what these guidelines are and that you already adhere to these guidelines even in the first draft. From the onset when you submit to the journal, make sure they can see that you are in line and you have read what they required for this journal. Now, the structure of your research paper. There are two structures. The one is called the hourglass model. This is the more basic structure. Is usually that you have an introduction, a body, and a discussion part in your research paper. Now, in terms of the scope, means that you start in the introduction quite general, and then you narrow it down to the more particular and more specific in terms of what you are studying, what the results are, and in the area of the discussion, you will be quite particular in what you describe. There's also the King model that has the title and an abstract, introduction, body, discussion, very similar to the hourglass model, and then also the references. This is called the King model because it looks like the King chess piece that you get in chess. So this is usually what the academic papers require that you have all these different parts in your academic paper. Now, the introduction is the guide for the reader to understand the topic that you are working with. And it is leading the reader from general subject areas to the specific field of research. Now, there are 3 phases that you can write in the introduction, and make sure that you have a good indication of this. The first one is to establish a territory, to say this is the area where I am going to do the research. In terms of our example, we are going to work in the research area of English poetic literature in the first half of the 17th century, the example that I used of Shakespeare. Establish a niche, so that this area, specifically the first half of the 17th century, has not been researched yet, and then you occupy the niche. So we can illustrate it as follows. Let's say the territory describes a few papers that was written, or papers that had been written in this topic field. Then you say, but there is an opening, there is a niche, there's an area that can still be covered in research, and then your research paper will then occupy that niche. That orange paper is then an illustration of your paper. So if you start writing the introduction, usually you will start in the past tense, speak about research that has been done, this has been established. Then you will also have some established facts which you can put in the simple present tense, and make sure that you plan each idea into a separate paragraph. Now, it's also important to give background information, only if required, and state your hypothesis or objective clearly. And then you can conclude with a thesis statement. Now, in our example, when we describe things in the past tense, we would say previous studies has researched the poetic literature in the 17th century, but did not look at the influence of Shakespeare on these different pieces of writing, past tense. And then you will say something in the line of Shakespeare's work influenced or has a huge influence on poetic literature ever since. So in that sense, you will speak in the simple present tense. And when you plan the different ideas in each paragraph, it's important then also to formulate your paragraphs in a clear way. Now, in the next slide, we will look at that. When you write the paragraph, first you start with a statement sentence. In our example, let's say our statement sentence is Shakespeare's work was well known by the beginning of the 1600s. Then you have a supporting sentences. Now, here's an example of a supporting sentence. While Shakespeare was alive, many of his Blackfriars plays were performed by the Lord Chamberlain's men and King's men acting companies at the Globe and Blackfriars theatres in London and Boston. Now, this is an established fact by other research, so you can give examples, you can give references to research, you can give descriptions or explanations in your supporting sentences. But then you end your paragraph with a concluding sentence or a short summary. For example, we can say in our example of Shakespeare, the topic sentence was Shakespeare's work was well known by the beginning of the 1600s. So a concluding sentence can say, so English writers of the 17th century were well aware of Shakespeare's work. So just paraphrasing or a summary of your beginning statement, and that makes your paragraph a good whole statement of, and also supported statement of what you are trying to say. So the body of the manuscript. In this part, you will analyze and evaluate information obtained. You will explain data and how to weigh the evidence. You will present the evidence. This is very important in this situation. You will use strong evidence from primary sources for support, like quotations, paraphrases, and summaries. You will point out strengths and weaknesses on both sides of the arguments. You will detail the critical points, and you must make use of appropriate examples, especially for your key points. That is quite important. Now, the research methodology description in the body, it is important that you clearly define your research methodology. And you should answer the following questions, like how is the research carried out? What procedures, methods, and approaches are used during the study? Why were these methods used? What are the advantages and disadvantages of the chosen methods? And then you can advance to the discussion. Now, in our, just to go back for a moment, in our example, how is the research carried out? Well, in our example, we can say this will be probably a literature study. And what procedures or methods are and approaches are used? We can say our Shakespeare study will be a computerized search for keywords in the literature, the poetic English literature in the 17th century, first half of the 17th century, or a text analysis or any other kind of method that can be used. So if we advance to the discussion part, now the discussion should focus on what the results mean and, more importantly, why. It should ask the question why. A strong research paper will appropriately justify the discussion. It should summarize the principal results. It should analyze relationship generalizations and trends among the results as well as exceptions. It should discuss likely causes for the observed pattern. It should discuss if your study agrees or contradicts previous work. It should talk about implications and possibilities. And it should add evidence or a line of reasoning supporting each interpretation. So while you look at that slide, I will just have a quick look at the questions that we have up to now. Okay, I see there are questions about research questions and hypothesis, and I will give an example soon. And then how do you determine the methodology and design to answer the research questions? And I would just like to make to give a remark about that at the moment. When you start with your study, you should look at the kind of research designs, the methods, the methodology that are being utilized in your field. Look at the different papers. How do they test things? How do they analyze it? And you can make use of those kind of research methods and methodologies in your own research. So if we continue, the last part then will be the conclusion. Now, in this conclusion, you will rewrite your statement, your thesis statement, given in the introduction. And you will kind of paraphrase the thesis statement. Try not to just repeat the thesis statement as it is. You can concisely summarize all the main points discussed in the body of the paper, and you end the conclusion with a strong, meaningful, and confirming statement relevant to your topic of research. In our example, the conclusion would be, let's take the topic again, the influence of Shakespeare's work on English poetic literature in the first half of the 17th century. So let's look at this statement as a question. How did Shakespeare's work influence English poetic literature in the first half of the 17th century? So the topic states we are looking at the influence, and the question simply asks, how did Shakespeare's work influence English poetic literature in the first half of the 17th century? When we come to the conclusion, we should paraphrase that uh, topic statement, which is very much also a kind of a thesis statement. You can say we've researched how English poetic writings in the period 1700 to 1750 was impacted by the literature of Shakespeare. So it's basically the same thing that you say, but you state it in different terms. What would a thesis statement look like? A thesis statement would be something like Shakespeare's work had a huge influence on English poetic literature written in the first half of the 17th century. That is a statement which you can say is true or false. That is a statement that you can test. So Shakespeare's work had a huge influence or it did not have a huge influence, and that will say whether your thesis is proven or not. So in the conclusion, you will also then end with a strong, meaningful, and confirming statement relevant to this topic, saying, yes, indeed, we can say that Shakespeare's literature had a huge influence on the poetic literature in the first half of the 17th century. If we look at the referencing styles, well, the referencing styles mostly used are those of the American Psychological Association, the APA, the Chicago, also known as the Turabian method, and the Modern Language Association, MLA, referencing style. The MLA is most commonly used to write papers and cite sources within the liberal arts and humanities. Every citation system has its own rules and ways to cite sources. And commonly used reference management software that you can also make use of, and I would advise that, is iGaion, BibBase, BibDesk, Bibus, EasyBib, EndNote, KBibTeX, Mendeley, Bibliographer, RefBase, RefDB, and Zotero. Now, we've looked at how to choose a good journal, how we should write the introduction, writing the body, writing the conclusion, referencing. Now let's look at open access in humanities and social sciences. Now, if you look at this slide, you will see that there are basically three open access models, two mostly established and then a hybrid form. So we have the gold open access model, the green open access model. The gold is a version where the final publisher version of your article will be made available in open access on the journal's website. While in the green one, the authors self-archive their articles, usually not the final version, in an institutional or a subject repository, like in your university or your institution's repository, or one that is available. Now, in the gold open access model, article processing charge may apply. Articles becomes open access without any embargo period immediately when it's published, but you get some variance on this model. For example, there's the hybrid final publisher version of the articles in a subscription-based journal are made open access immediately after the article processing charge or offsetting agreement. or the APC final publisher version of the articles are made open access after the APC, and there's no subscription model, or there's the model where the final version of the articles published are published in fully open access journals which do not charge an APC. The green open access models usually have no fees or charges applicable. Articles can be subject to an embargo period by the publisher where it cannot be made available on open access for a period of time. And you also get a few variants of this. You get the preprint, the author's copy of the article before peer review, and the postprint, the author's copy of the article after peer review and before the formatting by the publisher. That is the open access version that are being made available. Now, the hybrid forms, we can say that the gold form with APC has the advantage that it is completely open. The green version is free on the other side, but it has limited open access. And the hybrids can have open access that coexists with subscriptions in journals, which means that the global open access cost is about 2/3 of the subscription, and that's much more cost effective, and it has open access, full open access. So in summary, we can look at this picture, this illustration, where the researcher decides where to publish. So if we take the top line, the researcher published in an open access article journal, then pay the APC, and you get the gold open access route, and it's immediately available, open access via the publisher, and that's the final product that is available. You can also choose to publish in a subscription-based journal or a hybrid journal. There you have to search for an open access repository often, using something like opendoor.org. And you can then self-archive in that repository depending on your publisher's policy. It is also then immediately available, or it is available after a certain time period, but it will be open access. And the hybrid journal option would be where you have the subscription-based journal with a paid open access option. You pay the APCs, and it is immediately accessible by everyone on the internet. So that is really an option to look at. Open access in humanities and social sciences. We would say that green open access is more practical as a model as compared to gold open access for humanities and social sciences researchers. Why is that? Because the great bulk of research in humanities and social sciences is not grant-based. Therefore, it would be difficult for many researchers to pay the APCs. But important is that you should evaluate your own situation. Look at the costs of the APCs. If you can afford it, that's a good option then to take the gold route. If you cannot afford it, look at the green option and or some form of a hybrid. I do want to emphasize two very important initiatives. The one is the OAPEN initiative. This foundation is a non-profit organization with a registered office at the National Library in The Hague in Netherlands. Now, it is dedicated to open access, peer-reviewed books in humanities and social sciences. That is something to be excited about. It offers two services, the OAPEN Library, which is a central repository for hosting and disseminating open access books, and the Directory of Open Access Books, the DOAB, which is a database of open access books. Now, the OAPEN work with publishers to build a quality-controlled collection of open access books and help publishers, libraries, and research funders with dissemination, quality assurance, and digital preservation. And it has three goals. There you see them: building a branded collection of open access peer-reviewed titles, increasing the visibility and retrievability of high-quality publications, and the promotion of open access book publishing. That is a very positive initiative and something that one should take into account when you are publishing in the social sciences and humanities. Then there is another initiative, the DOAJ. It is an online directory that is community curated. It was launched in 2003 at Lund University in Sweden with 300 open access journals, and currently it has 12,000 open access journals covering STEM, social sciences, and humanities. A very important portal to be aware of. It indexes and provides access to authentic, high-quality, open access, peer-reviewed journals. And it is an independent organization that runs on donations from sponsors and publisher members. Now, all DOAJ services are free of charge, including being indexed in the DOAJ. All data is freely available. This is a step in the right direction. Now let's look also at the digital humanities. That's the last section of what we will discuss in this webinar. Digital humanities is a fairly recent development in the humanities. And what exactly is it? It is the critical study of how digital technologies and methods intersect with humanities scholarship and scholarly communication. So this word intersect is very important, the intersection of using digital technologies in the scholarship of humanities. And it investigates the use of digital tools and software for interpretation and analysis of humanities research and how digital methodologies can be used to enhance humanities. And this is the core importance of the digital humanities. It investigates the use of digital tools and software for the interpretation and analysis of humanities. And it allows scholars to approach old problems with new methodology. Now, very important, if you look at this example, and this is only one example of many of the GEFI, if we can pronounce it that way, which shows an example of networking, and this can be different kinds of networking. It can be people who connect with each other's families or community or any kind of network that is analyzed and portrayed in such a way, in such a graphic way. And this just gives us one example of many that can be used in the digital humanities. Now, what can digital humanities do? Digital humanities redraw the boundary lines among disciplines. For example, the humanities, social sciences, arts, and natural sciences. The digital humanities expand the audience and social impact of scholarship in humanities. And it facilitates the development of new forms of inquiry and knowledge. Now, we can definitely say that it trains future generations of humanists through hands-on project-based learning. You can, through the computerized models and possibilities, see how certain social patterns form and how certain research subjects become alive. Things that would be just a literature study in the past can suddenly become a very lively study by showing certain links or networks or appearances of certain concepts in many different kinds of literature. And then the digital humanities is capable of developing practices that expand the scope, enhance the quality, and increase the visibility of humanistic research. Now, there are a few misconceptions about digital humanities. The mere use of digital tools for the purpose of research and communication in humanities cannot be considered as digital humanities. You cannot say, I'm busy with a literature study and I'm working on my computer on a word processor and therefore I'm busy with digital humanities. So it's not the mere use of digital tools, it's really the utilization of these tools in analyzing and interpreting meaning in the humanities. So digital humanities does not include the study of digital artifacts, new media, or contemporary culture in place of physical artifacts, old media, or historical culture. So the object of your study will still be the same, but you employ new methods, new methodology, things that or methods that make use of computerized or digitalized methodologies, programs. Let's have a look at some of these programs. The digital humanities research tools, you can get tools for data visualization like Cytoscape and Gephi, file conversion, Oxgarage, Pandoc, text editing, there you see the names, content management systems, mapping, organization, programming languages, text analysis, transcription, virtual research environments, web archiving. All these things can be done by the tools in the digital humanities. And some digital humanities journals. There you can see some examples, the IEEE Multimedia and the new review of hypermedia and multimedia, International Journal of Humanities and Arts Computing, Language Resources and Evaluation, Digital Scholarship in the Humanities. The digital humanities also have open access journals, and there's quite a list of these journals. You can scan through those. Ariadne, Digital Humanities Now, just look through the list. There's quite a few that you can make use of. So in this webinar, we looked at how to get started with your research study, publishing in humanities and social sciences, open access publishing in humanities and social sciences, and digital humanities. I would like to look at some questions that we have. And if you want to ask questions at this point, it is a good time to do that. So I see the question, what is a good way to think of a topic if I still don't have my own niche? Okay, that's where the reading and getting yourself familiarized with the area that you want to work in is important. Start reading and look at the question that you have, and then you test it. And if you see there's a lot of information or someone has already done that study, move on to a next question. Try a next question. That's why it is important that one have some background in your field of study, because through this background, if you've done your postgraduate studies already or started with postgraduate studies, you will have been exposed to a lot of information in that field of study, and somewhere along the line you would get some questions in your mind. So test those questions, write them down, and that would be the first place to start. If you don't really have a topic yet, think of something that would interest you and start reading around that, and then you can narrow it down until you get a specific topic. So the next one, I joined late, it's recorded. Oh, and that will be answered by Enago. And let me just look at the next one. Usually the difficult aspect of writing paper is beginning the writing. So what's the strategy? I think that's the question. The rest of the question, let me just open it up a bit. So what's the strategy in outlining what to write? Well, I think outlining what to write is a strategy in itself, which is a very important strategy, and you can make use as you write and as you start getting information about your research. Make pictures, draw a mind map, make tables, draw up some tables, or just make lists of things that you see, and then from there you work and look at certain aspects that you would like to cover in your research paper. And as you do that, go back and ask, are these issues that I've listed relevant to my study? Have they been covered by some other researchers? And that will help you to narrow down the different topics or the different subtopics that you would like to cover. So, and the next question has to do with narrow or extend the contents. Well, basically, it has to do with the topic that you choose. In my example, I was speaking about the influence of Shakespeare on English literature. Now, that's very broad. So you can narrow that down by saying, okay, let's look at a specific aspect of English literature. Let's just look at the poetic part of it. So ask yourself, is there a smaller aspect that you can cover? Or you can limit it to a certain time period. So there are different ways that you can narrow down your topic, which will have an influence on the length and the contents of your writing. Let me look at some more questions. Yes, there was a note about natural sciences. What we were saying in the beginning was there's a difference between humanities and social sciences on the one hand, and natural sciences on the other hand. And that distinction is often made because the natural sciences would focus more on the empirical, more on the numbers and technical sides and analyzing in a quantitative way, while the humanities and social sciences will more focus on the meaning. But then we can also distinguish between humanities and social sciences, and in that case, the social sciences will make more use of empirical studies as well, more than the humanities. So that's what we were trying to say in the beginning. Well, thank you for these comments and questions. I think it's very good to do a review of what we've been doing by looking at this. The typical structure of a well-written article, if I should recap it, it would be the title, the abstract, then we have the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. Introduction, body, and conclusion. Now, in your body, then you have the different aspects that you will write about in the body, which will have all your discussions, your, let me just go to that part, your research methodology, your descriptions, your analyzing, evaluations, your discussion will all be part of the body, and then you come to the conclusion, which is in a way a summary, but also giving the final result of what you have found. Okay, I'm going to take one or two questions still. Let me just look at what we have here. Tips on justifying why your niche is worth studying is quite a difficult question, and it has a lot to do with how much you are at home in your specific field. But two important things. The one is that you should look at which areas that you can think of have not been covered by the literature and the research done up to now. And the second thing is which questions or which approaches can you add to the research that haven't been done up to now? So, because every person has a unique approach, and that's why more research and more researchers are needed. So, what is there that you can contribute to this whole discussion or the whole debate about your topic that no one has thought of, or a specific perspective that no one has done before? I'm going to answer one more question. Oh, this is a good question. With the rise of interdisciplinary studies, does it still make sense to divide social sciences and hard sciences? For example, medicine and healthcare is starting to include more and more psychology and sociology. Why do you think it's necessary to separate these fields? Now, that is a very good question. And once you start working with these things, you also realize exactly what you say. The disciplines are not clearly defined, not clearly separated, and it all has to do with what can you think of? How can you link different disciplines with each other? So I'm glad about this question. We must remember that it is in a way an unnatural division that we are making, but we just try to define each area first before we go and say, but they also interlink. And especially if we look at the digital humanities, the so-called hard sciences and the computer sciences and the digital sciences are intersecting with the humanities. And the same as is mentioned here, in the medical, the social sciences are often also combined with the medical or the other sciences. So yes, that's a very important thing to remember. And I'm glad about the question because we should keep that in mind. And I would also say that it is not good that social sciences and humanities are often not the primary the no, okay, sorry. The social sciences and humanities are often not the ones that are funded as much as the other sciences, and it has to do with this distinction. I want to go forward to the next slide. I'm sorry. And this slide has to do with a course that is available in Publishing in Humanities, also authored by myself, and it is available on the link that you see there. And you will learn about important research concepts in humanities, about methods, methodology, and research design, and other practical considerations. Actually, if you would like to know more about the questions that you've asked and the issues that you've raised, this is something that you can really look at. 6 months a course that you can do, and look at that link. You can maybe copy it or take a picture of that and go to it afterwards and get good information there. Okay, we have posted our queries. And the link that for the course has been shared to everyone, and you should be able to access it. So I want to wish everyone happy writing, and thank you for attending this webinar. We really hope that you have gained a lot through this.